So I'm waiting for you to come to this page. You thought I was going to be on another page. I can't get on that other page yet until these other pages are taken down. I'm going to keep using them. Okay. Bear with me. Of course, there's no one to bear with me. Because you don't know where we are. Here I am, live. Anchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. A bit spaced out here because I'm leaving tomorrow morning, and I did a program till we got back about 5:30, and I've been packing, and it's probably 100 degrees out, and sweating. And we went to the program at 8:30 this morning. So I've been pretty much gone all day, and then came back and was packing. And so I am just kind of settling down for a moment here to be able to give this class. And as you can see, things are just a bit disrupted. Yesterday, I was supposed to give class, and I went to visit my godbrother, and I thought that maybe he and I could do class together, but when we were supposed to go, it was raining, storming. It's the rainy season here, and so we got there very late, and we were talking, we took prasadam, and he didn't look like it would have been worked for giving class together, and I was quite exhausted. Basically every day, 4, 5, 6 hours a day we're doing classes. So, what I was going to do with him was ask him questions about Prabhupada, because he had spent a lot of time with Prabhupada. I was thinking I could ask him questions about Prabhupada. I'm trying to get out of this bright light, if that's possible, I don't know. I was going to ask him questions about Prabhupada. But I'll ask myself those questions. I don't have anything else planned right now. It was too busy today. So I was going to ask him, what is it that Prabhupada really liked, and what was it that he really didn't like? What really pleased him and what really displeased him? And I had actually asked this question to one of his servants, and he said that if a devotee misunderstood the philosophy, especially if it was preaching the wrong thing, that concerned Prabhupada more than anything, because that has the power, has a very destructive power if we misunderstand the philosophy, misrepresent it. And sometimes it's intentional, or foolishly intentional, we could say. We just don't believe. But that's rare. Most of the time it may be due to ignorance, or it may be also due to our own agendas, that we read something and that we might think, no, couldn't mean that, has to mean something else. You missed the Saturday class, so did I. Missed it also, so that makes 2 of us. I couldn't give the class Saturday. So there are many what are called apasampradayas, and they're distortions of the Siddhanta, the actual philosophy. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur has delineated 13 apasampradayas. I don't know if it's limited to 13, but 13 well-known apasampradayas, and who deviated from the Siddhanta, or the actual truth. So that was a huge concern of Prabhupada, that we would somehow or other create some different philosophy, some new idea, which was not in the line of our acharyas, and then propagate something that has no potency, or is useless, becomes useless. Because sometimes if something's changed too much, it becomes useless. So that definitely was a concern. So whenever you're talking philosophy, whenever you're discussing philosophy, whenever you're teaching philosophy, don't make assumptions, don't make illogical conclusions, but always make sure that you're representing Prabhupada as best you know, as best you've heard. Now, obviously, different devotees have different angles of vision, and sometimes they may represent Prabhupada from a different, going through their own experience and understanding and realization. But that's fine, but it should be chaste to what Prabhupada said. It shouldn't be something that he didn't say. It shouldn't be a philosophy that is not ours. Now, we have a problem, a potential problem which you may not be aware of, that sometimes something will enter ISKCON from outside that is not what Prabhupada taught, and somehow it gets in and somebody speaks it, and so you hear it in class, and then you think that's true. And how would you know what it was unless you're quite learned, or obviously you had heard something different for a long time. So sometimes that happens. And occasionally devotees say something and that you might think, I never heard that before, that sounds strange. That may be that it's not coming from Prabhupada and it's coming from outside. And so any time you hear something, it doesn't really sound like that's what Prabhupada said. Even if it comes from a respectable devotee, I wouldn't say you should be offensive, but it's that you can consider, is that actually what he said, or what's the reference, and so forth. You may want to ask. But try to represent what Prabhupada said, not what you think he said, what he should have said, what you'd like him to, what you would have liked him to say. That also happens sometimes. Someone may represent Prabhupada in terms of what we would have liked him to say, and then try to construe it in a way that that although he didn't say it, we'll say things like, well, he would have said it, or he didn't say it because of this or that. That can be dangerous. It's not entirely false that he could have said something that he didn't say. But sometimes that can be dangerous, and I've heard some arguments which were given by learned and respected devotees, but they wanted to make a point, and they went so far to say that although Prabhupada didn't say it, he didn't say it because the movement was this or that, but he would say it now, which there's no way of knowing that. And particularly what this devotee was saying went against so much of what Prabhupada had said in his books and in his manifest presence. And there was really no strong indication that Prabhupada was ever wanted to change what he said. So this happens even amongst advanced devotees. And then we have seen that at some time in the 1980s, the devotees started preaching that the last guru in the universe is Prabhupada, and the disciplic succession ends with him, and then everyone can be have diksha from him somehow or other. So they have their arguments and they have their reasoning, but the problem is Prabhupada never said that. So you have to construe it indirectly. Of course they'll argue that he said it, but the arguments are very, very weak. And a lot of them are very critical of ISKCON, and I think you understand that if in order to make an argument you have to criticize people and put them down, you don't really have an argument. So your argument is that what I say must be right because these people are bad. Well, it's not necessarily true. So they're changing Siddhanta. They're recommending that we should do something that's never been done before in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and something that Prabhupada never said to do, but construing it in some way and making us feel offensive for not following their system, which is it's just a very interesting reality, and it was in response to a lot of problems in the movement, and a lot of those problems were caused by gurus who couldn't maintain their position, so they concluded that Prabhupada actually never wanted them to be gurus, and proof of that is that they couldn't do it. Of course, many more have done it than haven't done it. So, but anyway, you see my point, that if there's an agenda that one wants to push forward, one may construe the philosophy to support their agenda when it doesn't actually support it at all, when there's no direct reference to it. So Prabhupada was concerned with that. So our job, our duty, is to learn from Prabhupada, learn from our spiritual masters, and not modify things because we think that's what Prabhupada would say now, or what we'd like him to say, or what he really meant to say. We can explain what he said, we can explain why he said it, we can explain why he said things in certain situations, we can explain how he would want us to speak and so forth. But sometimes, if we want to make a point, and the point may be valid, but sometimes in order to support the point, we might twist things around, which is unfortunate. And I've seen that done. A person started out with a premise which had validity, but to the extent that they wanted it to have validity, they couldn't support it that far with what Prabhupada said, and so they were kind of twisting his words, making him say what he really wasn't saying. So that's not pleasing to Prabhupada. That was a big concern. And of course, you might say, well, how would I know when anyone's doing that, and how would I know when I'm doing that? And often you wouldn't, unfortunately. But if you have a question or you're not sure, then better don't say it. Or you're not sure of the quote, well, I heard, but I don't know where, and somebody said, Prabhupada said. And it sounds good because it promotes an idea that I'm promoting. But I have no reference for it, then how can I say it? So that's the idea. Another thing that I saw that displeased Prabhupada a lot was devotees not getting along, devotees fighting, and especially creating factions, where one party, one group is opposing another. It could be men, women, grihastas, brahmacharis. It could be anything. People with different preaching ideas. Prabhupada really didn't like that. And often he said that when he had to mediate between devotees, devotees couldn't get along. It was impossible for him to translate because such a disturbance for him. And his main service was to translate. So if you read Prabhupada's letters, you will see that it wasn't uncommon that devotees weren't getting along, and it wasn't uncommon to see how upsetting it was to Prabhupada. And there are letters in which Prabhupada appreciated devotees because they were humble enough to get along. So sometimes it's hard to get along, sometimes we don't want to get along, sometimes we're convinced somebody is wrong, but there's another aspect to it that if we get along, that pleases Prabhupada. And what's more important, being right or pleasing Prabhupada? So I think sometimes we forget that. And sometimes we may feel someone has done something wrong, we're justified in condemning them, criticizing them. And that may be true in one sense, but we have to question, will that, even if I'm justified, will that be pleasing to Prabhupada? Maybe it isn't. Maybe sometimes when we point out the faults of others, we disturb the environment, we disturb the peace of the ashram. And so what's the point? Or we agitate people's minds. That's not pleasing to Prabhupada. Another thing that's not pleasing to Prabhupada is that if someone has a fault or a leader is having difficulty to let the world know the difficulty that person is having, that really, really upset Prabhupada. Because number one, it's no one's business. It was between that disciple and Prabhupada. Number two, the person is now publicly humiliated, so it makes it difficult for that person to come back if they've left. Or if they're in and they're publicly humiliated, they may want to leave. So Prabhupada was upset because it caused a problem for people who wanted to be Krishna conscious. If the whole world knew of their faults, and they're embarrassed to show their face in the association of devotees. There is, as you well know, there's a lot going on the internet. Criticism. This camp criticizes that camp. This devotee criticizes that devotee. And these are things that are very, very displeasing to Prabhupada. And I told you the story before when they first got a telefax, which was the forerunner to the fax machine. It was a combination typewriter fax machine. And so you could type on it, and then it would send the message via telephone cable. Via telephone cable to another telefax machine, and then that would type itself out automatically. And the devotees were kind of proud that they were using technology in Krishna service, and Prabhupada, when he heard about it, he said, "You'll just use it to gossip." Because, he saw the value of it. Of course, Prabhupada did most of his communication by mail, very little by phone, and this was, instant. Documents sent instantly. It wasn't really impressive to Prabhupada, and devotees thought it was useful, and somehow or other Prabhupada could manage without all that immediate communication. But aside from that, he not being impressed, he also said, "You'll just use it to gossip." And now that was the prediction, that if you can communicate that quickly, you can use it for business and you can use it for gossip. And because of our nature, we'll use it for gossip. So we could see that Prabhupada wanted us to use every moment in hearing and chanting about Krishna. And one of the regulative principles is no gambling, but that is expanded into no idle sports or basically wasting time. And so gossip would fall into that category. So, when you're roaming through Facebook and viewing all the non-Krishna conscious stuff that is only entertainment but has no educational value, you could consider that in a light way breaking the regulative principle, because I'm wasting time. Gambling is wasting time, it's addictive. Facebook's wasting time, Facebook's addictive. You don't think it's addictive? Don't watch it. See if you go crazy, and go hide, go lock your phone up, give someone else the key. How long can you live without it? Yeah, many people are addicted. So, speaking ill of other devotees, that was very displeasing to Prabhupada. And general gossip, which is what speaking ill is, was very displeasing to Prabhupada. And he wanted us to utilize our time discussing philosophy. Once Prabhupada said, "We're philosophers." He said, "We're philosophers and we should always be discussing philosophy." Gambling with our time, yeah, you could call it that. Yeah. It's basically wasting time, but no. Part of that regulative principle is frivolous activity. So, wasting time, doing things which have no intrinsic value, just pure entertainment for entertainment's sake and no real value for you, it's wasting time. That's actually against the principle of gambling or frivolous sports. That's the way Prabhupada explained it. So, sometimes I see a devotee or someone trying to be a devotee or someone calling themselves a devotee, or maybe they're not really a devotee and they look like one. And they're heavily criticizing other devotees. And I just cringe, because I think if Prabhupada saw that, he would be so disturbed, so upset. And, he's come to America to create a society of Vaishnavas, and this is what they do. They just publicly humiliate one another. one time the devotees were fighting amongst one another, and Prabhupada said, he said, my godbrothers did not fight amongst one another until after Guru Maharaj left. He said, but you're fighting now in my presence. So, that's interesting. Like, you would think in the presence of the spiritual master, there would be some respect and reverence amongst devotees. But even Prabhupada said we couldn't even wait to fight. And it's a special attribute of Kali Yuga. But it's not meant to happen in Vaishnava society, and social media has really facilitated that. And I don't think Prabhupada would like social media when he would see how it's being used negatively. Of course, for preaching it's fantastic, and obviously he would like that. But the downside of the profuse criticism by Prabhupada, excuse me, the profuse criticism, I'm tired, the profuse criticism that is available on the internet, it's like, it's problematic because Shastra teaches us that we shouldn't hear blasphemy or criticism of a Vaishnava, and it just pops up so often on the internet. And it's a regular principle that if there is blasphemy, you need to leave that place, or you need to stop that person. It is said you should cut out the person's tongue. Probably that's not recommended or a good idea, but the idea being, stop the person from saying that. If you can't stop them, then you shouldn't stay there and listen, because it's going to negatively impact you. And you become an accomplice to the... we become accomplice to the blasphemy when we hear it, when we allow ourselves to hear it. So sometimes I read this just because I want to know what people are thinking, I want to know why they're upset, I want to know what's going on. But some of it I can understand why people are upset. They want the movement to be better. They were not raised in India, they don't understand Vaishnava etiquette deeply, or they haven't spent a lot of time in India to understand the culture, that even if you don't like somebody, there's a way to address it and deal with it. So they don't always know that, or maybe they know and they don't follow it, and a lot of times I understand why they're upset, and I can empathize with them. But the problem is, other people have to read it, and although your case may be valid that someone has done something wrong, the person you're talking about has disciples, and it's like one of the basic laws of etiquette is you don't criticize someone else's guru. That's just like so simple, etiquette, basic, It's common sense, but it is part of etiquette that you always try to increase the faith of a disciple in their guru. So now, gurus are being openly criticized, disciples of those gurus may come across this. It's, if someone has a gripe with a guru, okay, he can take it up personally with the guru and say, Maharaj, Prabhu, I feel that what you're doing is not representing Prabhupada. All right, let's discuss it. Devotees are humble. If they're approached respectfully and with a sincere motivation to help, they'll hear. But to publicly do it, very displeasing to Prabhupada. And then becomes displeasing if we read it. So, but some people have, they can't help themselves. They believe they're serving Prabhupada by pointing out what's wrong. I was mentioning the other day, there was this site, I was reading an article, and happened to be on a Riptic site, by a devotee who is the most blasphemous devotee I've ever met. Unfortunately, I made him a devotee. Last time I saw him, he said, you're probably regretting you made me a devotee. I said, yeah, I am. We were laughing, but he's like, the furthest thing from a gentleman I've ever seen. I would say that. So I was mentioning that on his site he's got all the gurus exposed. So there was my name, Mahatma Das exposed. I was like, wow, what did I do? And then he shows a picture of my wife, her Facebook, and she's wearing a kurti. And he says, his wife, it must mean I'm a feminist, I guess. His wife is not wearing a sari and her head's not covered. So I've been exposed now. So you understand what I'm saying. So this is not something that is pleasing to Prabhupada. When if you have an issue, what are you talking? You think it's really bad that you're a guru and your wife, in her Facebook photos, her head isn't covered. If you think that, all right, well, write me, discuss that, convince me, explain why. In South India, not one woman covers her head. ISKCON, outside of ISKCON, they don't do that. In North India, they do. We have congregations. We have millions of people. All the women don't wear saris. It's like, all right, so maybe the guru's wife should, right? But this is not Prabhupada's mood. Srila Prabhupada is saying, what happened with the senior devotees that don't follow the rules and criticize others? Well, same thing that happens to the ones that follow the rules and criticizes others. Not good. Not good things happen. It depends on your intention. It depends on what you're trying to do. But one thing that I've noticed that happens, is that some people who criticize, they can't stop. They can't stop criticizing. And I would say that, you'd say, what happens to those people who criticize? I would say that's what happens. They can't stop criticizing. They become weakened by the aparad, and in that weakened state they continue to criticize, because constant criticism is a sign of an anartha. It's a sign of a weakness. So what happens to those who criticize? They keep criticizing. That's the result of their weakness. I sometimes feel sad people know Krishna consciousness for many years and they're making the same mistakes. Yeah, we're conditioned souls. It's not so bad if they know they're making the mistakes and they're trying to correct it. Yeah. Gurnisha says we should have a Prabhupada meter to know if this is pleasing Prabhupada. Well, one of the things that I find interesting, and it's such a simple point, is that sometimes we're debating an issue. Is this right? Is this wrong? But in the debate, we're looking at philosophy. We're looking at our books. We're discussing from different points of view. And in those discussions, sometimes one simple way to address it would be, can we determine whether this would be pleasing to Prabhupada or not pleasing to Prabhupada? And I've seen sometimes discussions where you could actually philosophically make a point, but that point is not pleasing to Prabhupada because there are precedents that Prabhupada set that shows that he wouldn't be pleased if that was done. So that's interesting, right? I'm going to move back. This light is like crazy. So, it's a very simple point, obviously, but I think sometimes, it's so simple, but we don't, it's like a little kid may say, well, is that pleasing to Prabhupada? To him, that's just like the first thing he would think. We get caught up in philosophy and we may forget that. And so I've heard devotees say things, quoting Shastras, surmising from different verses a point which I feel would be really displeasing to Prabhupada. I feel it stands against what Prabhupada stood for. But they're using Prabhupada's words to make their point, it's just very interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen that before. But I was just reading something the other day, and I was actually amazed. The devotee was quoting Prabhupada, and his conclusion was like totally antithetical to so many of Prabhupada's purports. his conclusion of how Krishna consciousness should spread. And it was antithetical to many of Prabhupada's purports of how Krishna consciousness should be spread. And he was basically critical of a lot of the innovations, and he felt we should go back to something more conservative. Interestingly, Prabhupada was criticized of that also by his godbrothers. So it was just amazing. And I was thinking, was this devotee thinking, would this be pleasing to Prabhupada, or did he just assume it would be because he believes in what he's saying? So, I haven't spoken to him about it, and I'm sure he has lots of good points, and I'm sure there's a place for what he's saying within ISKCON, but he wanted to make it universal, which it will never be, and it never could be, and I believe it would destroy the movement if what he wanted to do would be universally implemented. I mean, people would leave ISKCON. They wouldn't be able to fit in ISKCON if things were the way he wanted. But there are plenty of devotees who would be happy to do things the way he wanted. So we come back to the point. If he could establish his agenda with the premise that this would be the best thing for ISKCON, but people were leaving ISKCON, obviously that wouldn't be pleasing to Prabhupada, or people were becoming upset about it and disturbed and so forth. So how could that be pleasing to Prabhupada? Because people would be disturbed because they wouldn't see Prabhupada in that. So what are you doing? You're creating something Prabhupada didn't create. So, like that. Yeah. One of the problems is coming to a conclusion before you allow Prabhupada or the Shastra to make the conclusion. Like you enter it with a conclusion. Or you come to our movement with so many ideas about what's right and wrong. And then, even when you're in Krishna consciousness, you assume all those ideas are right because you're a devotee, and you wouldn't have been a devotee unless you were thinking clearly. But all those ideas may not be right. And so you can't just hold on to an idea because you think it's right. So I think that happens a lot. Like, oh, this makes sense to me. All right. Maybe it makes sense to you, but does it make sense to Prabhupada? Can this be supported? And a lot of times it can't be. And so we shouldn't make assumptions that something's right because it makes sense to us. Could be wrong. And just because it makes sense to us, that's fine. It may be right, but there needs to be support for it. And it can't be interpreted, convoluted. It's got to be, clear. This is clearly. Look, see, the thing is, a lot of devotees are not reading Prabhupada's books enough. And if you're not reading enough, you don't get the whole context of everything Prabhupada's saying. So Prabhupada may say 100 times one thing, and he may say another thing which contradicts that one time. And so you come across that one, and you don't understand he said an opposite 100 times. And if you understood that, you would better understand why this time you didn't say it. What's the context? What does he mean? Or maybe he didn't say it exactly, but you can understand he means the same thing he said in the other 100 places. But if you don't know that, then you read the other thing and think, oh, just see what Prabhupada said. This means he believes this. No, it doesn't mean he believed this. He said 100 times this. This is just a different way of saying that, or a different situation where this could be applicable in this specific situation. But it doesn't undermine what he said 100 other times. It doesn't supplement it, supersede it. And so that's important. So you need to read Prabhupada's books, and then you'll get a clear understanding, because you'll see him saying the same things over and over and over again. And then it becomes clear, oh, this is what Prabhupada means. Now, the other problem is just things sinking in, like you hear things, but it doesn't sink in. So sometimes it just takes time. We have to hear the same thing. again and again, and maybe someday we'll understand. Oh, now I understand. I thought I understood, but I realize now that I didn't. Now I understand. We all have that experience, right? Ananga Manjari Ki Jai. So, we've been talking about things that displease Prabhupada. The other thing that I saw that displeased him, or I would say, I don't want to say necessarily displeased, but I would say was just unnecessarily disturbing him. I guess you could say displeased. When marriages weren't working well, and devotees wanted to get divorced, or devotees were complaining to Prabhupada about the marriage. I don't like my wife this, my wife that. It was just so upsetting to Prabhupada. In the early days of the movement, if someone wanted to get married, they would ask Prabhupada for his blessings. Because it was a small movement. Prabhupada even says in the Bhagavatam that if you want to conceive a child, you should ask your spiritual master for his permission before you do it. So, of course, Prabhupada said, my permission is 50 rounds at the time of the month when it's most likely to conceive. So that's my permission. So he gave general permission, but the point was that a disciple wouldn't do things without the permission of his spiritual master. So we'd ask Prabhupada, can we marry this one? Yes, you have my blessings. And then, in a few years, many of those blessed marriages ended in divorce. Prabhupada was really upset. He said, do not ask me to bless any more marriages. He stopped. He wouldn't do it anymore. He said, if you want to get married, you're on your own. My blessings are not there. Not that I don't want you to succeed, but we've had so many problems, and you're so inept at it. So he was very upset by that. And he was upset by the immaturity of the devotees, the maturity of brahmacharis, and I think especially the maturity of the grihastas who weren't getting along. He was upset by not using common sense. Sometimes we would do things that were lacking common sense. And like, why did you do that? It was common sense not to do that. So, that we weren't maturing. We weren't becoming mature adults. We're being perhaps sometimes irresponsible. Or when things got difficult, as in marriage, things do get difficult sometimes. And then when they get difficult, we just want to give it up. And that was upsetting to Prabhupada. I mean, he wrote letters about that. You want to get married, and now, because things are difficult, you want to give it up, you're whimsical. So he was disturbed by any devotee who was whimsical, but most of the whimsy we find, or a lot of it we find in the Grihastha ashram, of devotees wanting to give it up because it's hard, it's difficult, it's not what they expected. He didn't like whimsical brahmacharis, just picking up and going wherever, every 6 months. He didn't like whimsical devotees, he didn't like immature devotees, he didn't like to, not that he didn't like us, he didn't like our actions when we were being irresponsible, because he needed us to spread the movement, and then we're not even responsible in our ashrams or with simple services. We give up our service, and he didn't like that. Prabhupada had leaders that were giving up their positions, leaders that were breaking principles. It really was just a disturbance because he was depending on us. And so, something to consider, that what I think it's very pleasing to Prabhupada that we're responsible, we're stable. At least I feel that very strongly, that if we're steady, stable, and then we can give association to others. If we're always Krishna conscious, people can depend on us. People can be inspired by us, and that's pleasing to Prabhupada. That here, I've come to spread Krishna consciousness, and now I have a devotee who can represent my teachings, who can represent them through his actions, can be an example of that. So I'm expanding myself that way. I have a trusted servant who I can trust to disseminate the knowledge and set an example of it. Wow. How pleasing is that to Prabhupada? But if we've cultivated Krishna consciousness and we are not able to live it or teach it as Prabhupada gave it, that's a real letdown for Prabhupada. He's depending on us. He depended on us and he's still depending on us. So to be responsible both in service and sadhana is very pleasing to Prabhupada. No question. I think it's obvious that when we were successful in spreading Krishna consciousness, that Prabhupada was extremely pleased. This was something that he pushed and pushed and pushed. Give people Krishna, spread Krishna consciousness, distribute books, preach in colleges, open restaurants, distribute prasadam, open temples, do Rath Yatra, do dramas, take kirtan out in the street. All these things. Prabhupada was so pleased that the movement was going on. Pleased that we bring people to Krishna, pleased that we take care of people. Whenever we had exhibited any kind of compassion for anybody, trying to share Krishna consciousness with them, Prabhupada was so happy. It was just, this was his mission, and we're doing his work, his bidding. Wow. I mean, what kind of mercy do you get? He comes to start this movement, and then you take a responsible position and you help people, you mentor people, you guide people. It's very, very pleasing to Prabhupada. And then you set an example of Krishna consciousness. So what could be better than that? Here, Prabhupada is now using you to the best of that you can be used because you're setting such a good example. Okay, here, more facility for you. Do more, take more. So, any devotee that took a responsible position in ISKCON, whatever that was, and was steady at it, definitely Prabhupada was pleased. He was really, really happy with that person because he needed to depend on stable and responsible people. And you could see in his letters how it just hurt. It hurt so much, not only personally, but also in terms of management. If someone in the responsible position just left, it's like, how can the movement go on? People are leaving like that. It can't. So, you can be steady in your service and do it well. Follow the regular principles, chant your rounds. Yeah, Prabhupada is so happy with you. He can trust you. Of course we know Prabhupada was so pleased when his books were being distributed. And when I was a young devotee, all the devotees wanted to participate in book distribution or book production, in some way be involved with the production or distribution of books because they knew it was so pleasing to Prabhupada and they just wanted to please him. So that goes without saying, that if we're involved in book production and distribution, directly, indirectly, that's super pleasing to Prabhupada. He wanted so much to get his books out. But at the same time, it was definitely pleasing to him if we read the books, if we knew the books, because he's writing those books primarily for us. So if we're reading them, then he feels satisfied. Right? He's spending all this time writing these books, and then we're absorbing them. But he's so happy. You're reading my books. Yes. Any author's happy when you read their books, but if the people reading the books are disciples, then it's special. Yeah. So definitely Prabhupada was happy. Not only that the books were being distributed, but that we were all reading the books, we were all learning the philosophy, we were all understanding Krishna consciousness. So happy. And lastly, because I'm getting tired, you're going to have to ask me questions to wake me up, otherwise I'm useless. Oh, Krishna. Go to bed late, get up early, Go all day without stop. Yeah. Welcome to the traveling preacher's life. Get up early tomorrow, pack up and go. I don't know. Travel for like 15 hours. Go into a new time zone. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You ought to try it. See how long you last. So, yeah, being steady in Prabhupada's service, yeah, it was very, very pleasing. Spreading the movement, distributing the books, publishing the books, opening temples, building Mayapur. You know, anything that Prabhupada wanted done, if you could do it, and just fantastic. You know, just so much mercy there. He's so happy. And then the last thing is, I can't take rest because they want to feed me, so I have to eat first. Maybe I'll fall asleep in the noodle soup. The last thing that pleased Prabhupada is just, if we're Krishna conscious, we're happy, we're satisfied. You know, Prabhupada was so happy if someone said, like some new person said, you know, Srila Prabhupada, I really like this Krishna consciousness. Or sometimes Prabhupada would ask, do you like this Krishna consciousness? Oh yes, Prabhupada, I love it. Oh, Prabhupada was so happy that people were taking it. It's like, you know, let's say you make something, you create a product or a new invention, or even you write a book, anything. And you say, do you like my product? Do you like my invention? Oh, I love it. I just love it. I use it all the time. But obviously the inventor, that makes his day. So when Prabhupada would say, do you like this Krishna consciousness? Oh yes, Srila Prabhupada, I like it very much. I'm very happy. Oh, Prabhupada was so happy. That, you could say, made Prabhupada's day when he found out someone said, yes, I was unhappy, I was depressed, this and that. Now I've taken to Krishna consciousness, now I'm happy. Wow. That made Prabhupada happy. So, if one way you can please Prabhupada is just be happy in Krishna consciousness. Don't be happy in Maya, be happy in Krishna consciousness. If you're happy in Krishna consciousness, you're taking all the gifts Prabhupada gave, and then he's happy you're using those gifts. Right? So, I think I'm going to end class early. Otherwise, class may end me, and I may, disappear into the woodwork. Well, one devotee actually fell asleep giving class. So the story goes. But it so happened that everyone else fell asleep also. I don't know how long it was, but when he woke up, he just took off from where he left off. That was, welcome to the early days of the Hare Krishna movement, when we did severe austerities by reducing our eating and sleeping. And, Okay. So, I have a crazy flight tomorrow. I fly into an airport 2 hours and 15 minutes. We land 2 hours and 15 minutes before my next flight, which is an international flight. So if my flight tomorrow is late, we're going to be in trouble. And then we're on to London. I will arrive Monday evening, I think, like 8 o'clock or something, or I don't know when. I forget. It'll be about midnight or something my time when I arrive, or 2 in the morning, but it'll be like 8 o'clock, I think. So, and then we'll be there for a couple of weeks. So all you Londoners, or those near London who want to come and have fun in Krishna consciousness, you're all welcome. Get on the next flight and we'll have a big party. And then my wife and daughter are coming on Wednesday. One of my daughter's best friends lives in London, and she's also joining the Polish tour and Woodstock. So, sounds like, Krishna consciousness is fun. And one of the things I like about Indra Swami, because we we've been going to Woodstock for the last 3 years, I think. And we spent a day at the Polish tour last year. And, I see him in other situations. He always makes Krishna consciousness fun, Have nice kirtans, dance, take nice prasadam, have nice classes. Just, relish it, make it fun. So that's it, We're relishing Krishna consciousness, and Prabhupada, he's happy. He came to give us Krishna. He came to help us relish Krishna consciousness. And so if we can do that, fantastic. Prabhupada's just very happy with us. Okay, so I'll sign off. We'll see you. We won't see you tomorrow. We're going to have to do that some other time. So, Guru Nishya, you can tell Sundari Radha to contact me and we'll pick another day. Yeah, maybe Tuesday will work. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Go Premanandi. Hari Hari Bol.